Welcome again to South Centers Chat. My name is Tom Worley. I serve as Director of OSU South Centers in Piketon, Ohio. And this session, we have special guest with us today, Sam Custer, who is serving as the Interim Director of OSU Extension for the Agriculture and Natural Resources Program. Welcome back, Sam.
Thanks, Tom. It's a pleasure to be back with you today.
Absolutely. I really think that's a gorgeous background that you have for this meeting today. Looks like the spring day that we're having in reality as well. So you could very well make the claim that you're sitting in some director's chair there somewhere in front of the library, maybe on the Oval.
That's right. Just taking it all in here on the Oval today.
Well, Sam, I know that you have been hard at work through this time of the virus, the COVID epidemic that we're working our way through, and no one is immune from that, hopefully immune from maybe catching the disease, but the effects of it. And Ohio agriculture has certainly been affected in a multitude of ways. And you shared with me that you had opportunity to prepare some data and take a look at the current situation that farmers in Ohio and really the agricultural industry, which is, of course, includes farmers, the kind of the linchpin, but there's a lot of supply on the input side, as well as the marketing channels, the further processing, and then the distribution of food from Ohio agriculture that is all impacted in myriad ways and some unexpected. But I think the object of us being together today is to kind of review that current situation and then make as best we can kind of an outlook, look toward the near future. So I think you've got some slides that you want to share, and I kind of let you lead through this.
Tom, do you see those slides now?
Yes, we're all good. Looks good.
All right. So I want to share with you Ben Brown, who works out of our AEDE department, and I put these together. We've shared these in several different audiences in the last 2 weeks, and you're spot on, Tom, when you talk about Ohio agriculture being right in the middle of this COVID-19 and feeling the effects of it. And we first look at this chart as we look at farm liquidity, and we think about our debt to asset ratios. By the first statement I would make is that we're nowhere close to where we were in the 80s. In the 80s, some of us were around then, and we experienced that, and we had debt to asset ratios significantly higher than where we are today. Oftentimes in that 20 to 25. Maybe even 28% debt to asset ratio. So you can see as we look out on this purple color bar, we're at 13.45% debt to asset ratio. And probably the negative, you see that climb out of those really good years there in the early teens at 2011, 12, I guess were really good numbers, and we've climbed from that. But where I would draw your attention on this chart, Tom, is this black line. The black line is our working capital to gross revenue ratio. We like to keep that number above the 20%. So you see this dotted line across here at 20%, and we've fallen since 15 below that dotted line. And this is what we have left at the end of the day after paying expenses for our family living expenses. This is what buys the family car. This is what replaces some things that we need in the house. So that number has dropped down significantly since 2015 and kind of taken a nosedive here as we look at 2020. So a real concern there. Our benefits the last couple of years, we've kind of lived off that MFP payments, our government assistance payments in 18 and 19, and really where we'll service our debt in 2020 will be based significantly on government assistance programs. So the last time we got together, and see if I can forward this slide here. Sorry for running through those like that. So when we look at this slide was what we looked at the last time. We talked about January 1st or 21st being kind of a starting point. We look at the care support system that's been approved by the federal government, and they're looking at our loss of income from January 1 through April 15th. So if we look at our January to April futures prices, and we're just using nearby futures, not exactly sure what the federal government's going to use. They haven't outlined that yet. But just to give you a clue where we're at, soybeans, wheat, and corn all off between 8 and 18% during that period of time on those futures prices. The S&P, as of April 16th last week, was off 16%. But we come down here and we look at between ethanol and our livestock commodities, you see significant losses there. Hogs down 42%, milk off 37%, cattle off 34%, and that was as of January 16th. So when we think back, when these cattle were put in these feedlots, we were looking at maybe $1.20 on those cattle, and now we're down at 85 cents. Hogs have dropped just unbelievably since January. It was looking like it was going to be a pretty good year for our friends in the hog business, and just all of those have tanked. And as we think about, Tom, where we're at today, it's even a more clouded picture. As we read the headlines this morning, as processing plants across the United States have begun to close or reduce their production. And we have cattle and hogs that are sitting in these feedlots, in these finishing buildings across the state of Ohio, across the country, that can't go anywhere. Some conversations last week with people that had cattle that were ready to sell, and they were told that locally there is no cash market. So you can't even take a bad price. You just can't move a lot of these cattle and hogs at all today. So they're sitting out here in a very awkward position.
Sure. They're just still the costs continue that meter runs. They have to be fed and cared for, and you can't kind of stop the clock, so to speak, in livestock production.
That's right. So we were Extension and some of our other colleagues that are in support of our livestock operations have come out with some fact sheets, some articles about holding animals on these least cost rations. We can do that in the beef system maybe for 2 or 3 weeks here and be all right. Where we get into difficulty is in the swine side of things. If you picture a merry-go-round, that's kind of what the swine business is in 2020. So a building, a finisher building, might have 2,500 head of hogs in it, 2,400. And when those animals leave the building, so they're hopping off that merry-go-round and move towards harvest, someone comes in right behind them and sanitizes that building, and then right behind them is a new group of pigs. So you're turning those buildings in less than a week, typically, sometimes 3 or 4 days. And when we ask our growers today to hold those pigs for 2 or 3 weeks, we get into a lot of issues. First of all, these pigs, they've been raised to gain weight. They've been bred to gain weight. It's hard to hold them, and they get too big, and then they don't work in the packing facilities that we have. And secondly, we've got a group of baby pigs coming right behind those pigs that need a home. So we see a situation on the farm where those prices are being driven down because we don't have a market for them. And then we go to the grocery store, and we may see in the grocery store that, hey, there's not pork chops there that I want for dinner tonight. And we get a confusing message because our consumers are seeing high-priced cuts of meat in the grocery store, or they're not available. And they think, wow, we've got a meat shortage. Well, we don't have a meat shortage in the United States. We've got a broken supply chain with these processing plants being out of operation. So that is a real concern, and we look at that every day. And we in Extension and universities across the country, I think, are going to try to step up and find a way that we can provide a safe work environment for those associates in those plant and facilities to fix this supply chain so that we can continue to move animals from the farm and eventually to the grocery store.
Right. Well, that's a critical link, and those places tend to be huge. And one plant, I think the one up in South Dakota that had to close represented 5% of all pork processing capacity in the nation. So that's significant how concentrated this livestock funnels down to when it hits to the processors, and then of course it widens back out on the other side for the distribution. But that very critical bottleneck of the harvest and the initial processing of the meat, certainly one that when that breaks down due to what we're facing, the sickness among the employees is what it's all about. That they might be automated, but it still takes hundreds of employees in a space that's confined and working relatively close to one another on a line, and that presents real problems when it comes to getting that distance that's important to try to maintain.
We've always worked really hard in agriculture to put on the table for our consumers a safe product at a very reasonable price. And I think we're well known for that in the United States. So the economy of size as we've made these processing facilities larger to try to take advantage of that economy of size. I wonder, Tom, when we come out of COVID 2019, as we start thinking about breaking some of these large processing facilities down into smaller units to protect ourselves in the future against these kinds of issues where we've put all our eggs in a couple baskets and it's made it difficult.
Yeah. And you've focused a lot on the hog industry. It was very important here in Ohio and in the Midwest as a destination for a lot of corn. But back in this graph, I wanted to just touch on one thing and see if I interpret this correctly. It looks like corn prices have been impacted significantly more than soybeans and wheat, and I presume that's tied to the ethanol price that's fallen in relationship to oil. And so much of our corn crop ends up in ethanol that if the price there declines, well, there's that segment of demand for the corn crop is down. So here you've got a whole slide for me.
Yeah, let's talk ethanol for a little bit.
Sure.
By no means am I an ethanol expert. I'll lay that out first, but I can look at the numbers and share with you today. Ethanol has been huge for our corn producers in the last 10 years, and it's just been a great way to sell that product that we raise here in Ohio and always have and across the Midwest. But as you look across time on this chart on the left-hand side, and you can see here since June of 18, our ethanol plants have operated in a negative mode pretty much all of that time, maybe got slightly above it in early fall of 19, but for the most part, negative margins across the board. And, we look at our oil prices today. We just don't have the incentive to blend a lot of ethanol at this point in time. And you can see on the right-hand chart where back in January, we were sitting there at about 1,079 thousand gallons of ethanol or barrels of ethanol, and we've dropped that to 570. So our ethanol production is half. And as we look today, I don't know that I can drive to an ethanol plant that's open from Western Ohio. And we had a large one here in Western Ohio that drove corn prices here for years, and they're still bidding on corn, but they're not up and producing ethanol, and their bids are significantly lower than our local feed and grain markets. So ethanol is down. I think when we look at that corn and soybean piece, we've not exported much corn. That's not been our market because we did have this huge ethanol opportunity and our feed opportunity. So we haven't concentrated on exporting corn, and it's going to be important for us to try to get in that game, I think, here in the future. Soybeans, soybean crush was up this last couple of weeks as we've crushed a lot of soybeans. When you think about ethanol, one of what they talk about here locally, it's not a byproduct, it's a co-product, is the dried distiller grains coming out of that process. And most of our hog rations, poultry rations, cattle rations include those DDGs, those dried distiller grains, as a protein source. Well, when the ethanol plants shut down, that required us to bring more soybean meal back into those rations and drove up the soybean meal prices and gives us a little bit of hope on the soybean side of things. And of course, if we can get things open back up in China, in the past, we've sold 1 out of every 3 rows of soybeans in Ohio have gone to China prior to the tariffs. So a lot of opportunity right there. And we look at soybean crush, that is that next chart. So you can see here that we really drove up that United States soybean crush there in March. So hopefully we can continually to track that.
Yeah. By and large, the soybeans held up better than the corn so far, but will remain to be seen. Sam, I think we got about 10 minutes left, so I don't want to rush things here because there's a lot of information on each slide, but I also don't want to miss the opportunity to kind of get through the material.
All right, Tom, we've got a couple more slides here we'll share with you. So we'll take a look here. We all like bacon, and bacon is been a great product off of swine, and I think even in Ag and Min on campus a year or so ago, they put that bacon vending machine in. And
right.
We'd all like to have one of those outside our office doors until we talk to our doctor, probably. But so when we look at pork bacon, our pork bellies, and that is our bacon, you can see here from middle of March to out here on April 15th, how we've dropped that bacon price. And you can also see that we've dropped a couple of the other cuts of meat that we may associate more with the restaurant market. So much of this livestock piece, we think about restaurants. Any restaurant serving breakfast is serving bacon. And it's just kind of how it works. And, I would be not sharing the truth with you. I haven't had any bacon since the last time I ate in a restaurant. So, and I think many people across the country are. So we've got that surplus of pork bellies out here now because it's not something that a lot of people eat at home. We have a lot of our higher price cuts of beef that just don't move in a local market, especially in this arena, because those are typically served out of the restaurant. There's not very many of us have a filet at home, so that is a reason why we're driving down some of these higher price cuts, and we some of the other cuts are still selling in the grocery store, but for the most part, we're losing a lot of our livestock market to restaurants being closed. So I want to finish with sharing just a little bit about the CARES appropriations. So where are we at with funds that are coming out in agriculture? Still yet to be determined how they're going to be laid out, but we do know that in this green section of this pie chart, that about $14 billion has been set aside there. What we do know is we go back to that busy chart we showed earlier. It looks like a majority of that money will go to the livestock side of things because that's where the biggest losses were. So when we're going to move that money towards those areas in agriculture that had those biggest losses from January 1 to April 15th. So if we come back up to this chart, you can assume that probably 2/3 of that CARES money for agriculture will fit down here in cattle, hogs, milk, cotton arena, and maybe a real small percentage in the grain crop side of things. So that's what we know today. And we're looking forward to hearing from Secretary Perdue to find out how they're going to determine and how to pursue that money. We've been telling growers the last couple of weeks, go back and find a day where you can do inventory on your animals. So if you're in the swine business, pick a day between January 1 and April 15th and make sure you have your inventory numbers then. If you have milk production, know what your milk production was for that time period. If you've sold animals during that time period, make sure you know what that is, because that's probably what's going to be used to make these payments.
Yeah. Well, this is a very informative set of data that you've put together, and a nice representation of it, Sam, and really appreciate you sharing this and backing up with some really, logic and explanation of why the numbers are what they are. And, just from a practical standpoint, why one of the significant things you talked about was kind of the switchover in our food system that with restaurants closed, this whole institutional market, which includes schools and universities, dining facilities, anywhere that we go that somebody else does the work of preparation and so forth, the whole idea of how it's cut, how it's packaged, how it's labeled tends to be different than coming to your local supermarket. And that's quite a transition. Even though everybody's got to eat, we learned that in Marketing 101, the demand for food is inelastic. But to make such an adjustment in such a short period of time with significant reductions in what's going to the institutional side versus out through the retail distribution, the regular supermarkets and places where we're used to shopping for meat, milk, and eggs and those sorts of things, why it's a big, big change. So I know we're getting wound down to just a minute or so left, Sam. Any final words, kind of looking to the future? Do you see the turnaround is all contingent, I know, in a broad sense, but anything you'd like to share, just looking as far as we can into the future?
Well, I think we have to look here to being able to open up the economy eventually. When we can see that, we put people can go back to restaurants, however that looks in the future. And then agriculture is going to have to be nimble and try to adjust. And it's hard to be nimble in these times to try to learn what the consumer wants. Our number one priority, I think, is to be able to try to get these processing facilities back open and running. And I think that's critical to agriculture. So hopefully we can move a lot of our resources that way. And we've got to open our markets back up to where we can move some of these corn and soybeans across to China, into Mexico, into Canada, to try to help us out there. So difficult time, Tom, and we need to move forward.
Yeah, well, certainly anybody working in agriculture as you and I, or as a farmer, or in the whole just sector of our economy, and you alluded to it, it was kind of pretty hard times before this hit on account of some of the production relative to demand, relative to international markets. We just had been in a downturn for the last 4 or 5 years, basically since, the last good times were in roughly 2012, as you pointed out, maybe 13, 14, but then definitely the last 4 or 5 years have been tough. And last year was extremely tough with weather conditions that we faced at this time of year. So it's just like the other shoe dropped, with this on agriculture. And so it's fortunate that we have, resiliency is built into the system. Farmers are adaptable. Farmers are ingenious. Farmers make a way. And they will no doubt step up to the challenge and work with the rest of the system, I'm sure, to maintain and keep us all fed, and hopefully be able to survive financially. That's, of course, the bottom line. Is sustainability is not sustainability unless it's financially sustainable, and that's what we hope can happen, and all across our economy, but especially where we're concerned in agriculture. Well, this is very informative again, Sam. Thank you so much for sharing it. Our time is up. I will wish you the rest of a great day, and our audience, we welcome you back to another South Centers Chat soon.